Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, February 7th. U.S. President Donald Trump's choice for chief trade negotiator insists tariff threats on Canada and Mexico are indeed about the war on fentanyl. Jameson Greer argued that the tariffs are about fentanyl trafficking as he faced questions from Republicans and Democrats during his Senate confirmation hearing on Thursday. Greer says America simply doesn't want to see another fentanyl death and that Trump would be acting within his power if he imposed steep duties on Canadian imports. Congress has authority over taxes and foreign commerce, but Trump pushed ahead with the levies using a national security statute that gives the president authority to control economics after declaring an emergency. Yesterday, we reported on a BC Ministry of Health document that says that a significant portion of opioids prescribed by doctors and pharmacists are being trafficked provincially, nationally, and internationally. The leaked document also says that the ministry has been conducting an investigation with next steps including targeting specific pharmacies. Adam Zivo, columnist with the National Post and founder of the Center for Responsible Drug Policy, joined us for more.
The leaked presentation was given by the Ministry of Health to law enforcement officials at the end of December 2024, and it appears that it is still being circulated throughout the provincial government even today. Now, what the presentation states is that a significant portion of the opioids being distributed through Canada's Safer Supply programs are being diverted to the black markets, and they are being trafficked provincially, nationally, and internationally. Additionally, the presentation is focused on the role of pharmacies in facilitating this system of fraud and overbilling the provincial government. For context, a pharmacy can make much more money from a single safer supply patient than most other patients. And that's because a safer supply patient will come in every single day and pick up three different medications. And when you have a patient coming in picking up three medications every single day, that means that a pharmacist can make a ton of money off of a dispensing fee. Essentially, that is a flat fee that is charged to the provincial government for every prescription that is filled. So, for example, in Ontario, addiction physicians who I've spoken with have estimated that a single pharmacy can make $1 million in fees with just 100 safer supply patients. Or to think about it another way, if you have a stable patient on methadone, which is a traditional opioid medication, they may only have to pick up their medications once or twice a month, versus once again picking them up every single day. So the BC government basically hired, well, they had their special investigations unit come in, and they identified over 60 pharmacies that seem to be abusing the system by paying kickbacks to doctors and to other social support workers to pressure patients into going on safer supply, even when these patients don't want or need safer supply. And so now you have vulnerable individuals who are being pressured into defrauding this program, and then they get these drugs, and then they sell these opioids on the street to organized crime, and then that ends up in the hands of everyday Canadians who then become addicted to opioids and escalate to fentanyl and then potentially die. Uh, the the really astonishing thing about this presentation is how it validates reporting that has been done for over 2 years, warning about this issue. So I've been reporting on safer supply diversion since May of 2023. And at this point, I've written over 50 articles and commentary pieces about the problem. When my reporting first came out, the BC NDP and the federal Liberals insisted that I was lying and fear-mongering, and that anyone who believed my reporting was peddling disinformation. It was a really difficult time. It is hard as a journalist to go up against the federal government when the federal government tells you that you are lying, even though you know from your interviews and from what you've seen with your own eyes that this is the truth. Over time, the BC government was forced to admit that this is a real problem. So, for example, in the beginning of 2024, BC's public health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, released a report based on interviews with a large number of addiction doctors and people with living experience with drugs. And she was able to confirm that diversion is a common occurrence. Yet, even so, Yara Sachs, who is the federal minister for mental health and addiction, claimed about 2 months later that opponents of safer supply are merely peddling fear and stigma, right? So we have this consistent gaslighting. And now, with the publication of this presentation, we know that not only has the public health officer recognized that diversion is a real thing, the BC provincial government is actively investigating this problem and has confirmed that it has an international scope. So I think the concerning thing here is that were it not for the fact that this presentation was leaked to the public, we might not know that this was actually happening. And the provincial government has cited, I guess, operational security for their investigation as a reason why they haven't shared this with the public, but the public has a right to know because this is a contested debate with national implications, and disinformation has been spread quite aggressively by the BC NDP and federal government saying that this does not exist. So I am concerned by the lack of transparency here. On top of that, I wonder if there will be any real accountability, given that the very people who pushed for safe supply so aggressively are now tasked with potentially overseeing, this investigation. I think that we should have a public inquiry, but I don't believe that the BC NDP will call for one because of the potential political and legal liabilities. It would obviously be devastating for the BC NDP to fully recognize that this addiction program that they championed so aggressively for years has actually been an absolute disaster and has made the overdose crisis worse, not better, and very likely harmed a large number of children. I think also, if they were to recognize this, this would open them up to a large number of lawsuits. There is currently already a class action lawsuit against the BC NDP by Greg Sword, who is the father of a young girl, Camilla Sword, who died 2 years ago at age 14 after developing an addiction to safer supply drugs. So him, as well as her friends who also developed these addictions, are suing the BC NDP. So acknowledging that this is a problem through a public inquiry would be like shooting oneself in the foot.
The RCMP's commissioner is praising a move by the federal government to list organized crime cartels as terrorist entities in the fight against fentanyl. Mike Duhaime says he sees value in the plan that includes the appointment of a national fentanyl czar, allowing a single point person to see the overall picture of drug distribution. He says it could also aid in the pursuit of charges to enforce laws. The federal plan is in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's threats to impose stiff tariffs against Canada, citing a southbound flow of migrants and drugs, including fentanyl. Canada's Advisory Council on Canada-U.S. Relations is hosting a summit today in Toronto where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau commended Canadians for stepping up in the face of Donald Trump's tariff threat.
And the place Canadians are in right now is, quite frankly, inspiring. How people have been stepping up over the past few weeks, sharing lists of how they can buy Canadian in their everyday lives. Reflecting on where they want to spend their dollars on vacation, whether it's Cape Breton or Banff or Quebec City. Thinking about how they can contribute as workers, as business leaders, as individuals to moving Canada forward in all the ways that matters.
Aimed at bolstering the economy in the face of Canada's rapidly changing relationship with the U.S., representatives from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and Canadian Manufacturing and Exporters were also in attendance. As Canada's big city mayors gathered for a meeting in Toronto, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was on hand to remind them that they have a role to play when it comes to avoiding American tariffs.
Team Canada will be stepping up. With the help of our Council on Canada-U.S. Relations, with Canada's premiers, Canadian businesses, Canadian unions, Canadian civil society, Indigenous leaders, and crucially, with the help of all of you, Canada's mayors and municipal leaders. We will be engaging closely with the U.S. administration to underscore why tariffs hurt us all and explain that the better path forward for our two countries, the only path for the United States to usher in the new golden age that President Trump desires, is to partner with Canada, not to punish us.
Trudeau also told the Big City Mayors Conference in Ottawa that they're the best ones to remind U.S. mayors Canada is their ally.
This is an all-hands-on-deck Team Canada effort, and unquestionably, that includes all of you. You are the ones who've built relationships with the leaders of America's largest cities who understand the importance of working together. You are the ones who decide whether your lucrative procurement contract goes to a firm in Moose Jaw or Montana. You are the ones who put local diplomacy in action, making it clear that Canada is a friend and an ally, and that tariffs would harm American cities first and foremost.
All right, when we come back, we'll be hearing from Airlab Incorporated's CEO on the problems with Canada's EV strategy. And after that, we'll have our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. After that, I sat down with our news director to talk about the World Health Organization and how Donald Trump pulled their funding and if Canada should follow suit. Stay with us. We'll have these stories and more news right after the break. With Canada's EV strategy now up in the air, business leaders are starting to voice their opposition to Canada's strategy for electrification. One of those business leaders is Michael Nightfor, president and CEO of Airlab Inc., who spoke to us earlier to share his concerns for the future of Canada's auto sector.
Well, let's go back to the very beginning when all of this started becoming a thing. In the beginning of the decade, this was the bright and shiny thing that was supposed to save the Ontario auto sector. Everybody was on board, electric, electric, electric. But then over time, the market started speaking up louder and louder, saying, look, people simply aren't buying it because of two very fundamental problems, the fiscal problems and the operational problems. So it's going downhill, and I'm really surprised that both on the federal and provincial level, they're still hoisting the flag and beating the drum on this. Well, I've been talking about what I call the Plan B, because I really believe that there's no sustainable future for electrification, and this has been very much substantiated by sober-minded engineers and economists and business people. So I think as far as Ontario or Canada is concerned, there has to be another technical path to this, because if we keep playing the same old tune, it's going nowhere. And I'm very much afraid that with President Trump's America First policies, Ontario's auto sector is going to be obliterated over the next couple of years, because Mr. Trump wants those jobs south of the border. Technology, any kind of technology, moves forward very, very rapidly. And we have undergone a test over the last 5 years or so of the electrification technology. And clearly there are both fiscal and technical problems with that. So we have to leave that behind. What is happening right now, mercifully, is that the markets are turning very, very strongly to electric hybrid or hybrid electric technologies, which are doing well in the market. My position on that is that hybridization is a very good and smart engineering approach to reaching certain objectives. But the whole notion of hybridization can move forward, and my company, in fact, is doing that by proposing a hybridization engineering solution which is non-electric. So I think if we can move from a to a non-electric hybridization model, we actually have a chance of resuscitating Ontario's automotive sector, because the way they're going right now, I think it's a dead-end road.
And now to Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy, who joined us earlier for our weekly energy update. All yours, Dan.
Well, Teresa, thank you very much. And this has been one of the most exciting weeks on the energy front that we've seen in a very, very long time. Of course, I'm referring to the threat of tariffs being imposed on Canada, what that would have looked like this time last week. Would it be 25% for everything, including our energy prices? As it turned out, it was a bit of a split decision at the beginning, 25% for everything, but only 10% for oil, likely due to the intervention of Premier Daniel Smith. The number was a lot lower, not because they were doing any favors for Alberta, but in fact, Alberta and our energy sector is extremely important to the United States as far as energy security is concerned. Look, Alberta produces a lot of heavy oil. The United States doesn't produce much. In fact, it produces none. It's light shale tight shale oil production is great for gasoline, but can't produce diesel, which you need for your military, which you need for your aviation sector, agriculture sector, mining, and transport sector. So all this means that Canada may have dodged a bullet, at least for the next 20 or so days, but it would appear that it has renewed some idea that the Canadian dollar is very much attached at the hip to the price of energy. We saw Canadian dollar lose more traction on Sunday night into Monday morning, dropped to about 148 pennies to buy a US dollar. When there was a reprieve, it came back to 143. That in and of itself, Teresa, means about a 5 cent a liter savings for most Canadians. Why? Well, because with GST and HST, the weak Canadian dollar that's not trading at par with the US greenback for whatever reason, and there's a lot of them, mostly due to the fact that there's not much attracting investments into Canada, therefore buying Canadian dollars, leads to about a 25 to 27 cent a liter loss in our purchase power. It's costing you and I 25 to 27 cents a liter because the Canadian dollar is very weak. What that really means is that across the country, we did see over an average a bit of a blip in prices. Let's start with Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, Victoria, and of course, British Columbia. Those regions saw an average increase of about 6 cents a liter, much of that due to the fact that the clean fuel standard in that province continues to be extraordinarily expensive. That's only one of the two carbon taxes that we have. So that's about 18, 19 cents a liter. We also saw the weakness in the Canadian dollar and some disturbance on the US West Coast as it relates to refinery outages, especially in San Francisco. But that aside, it means that if we're looking at $1.92, $1.93 for fuel in Vancouver and in 188 in Victoria, 189, and about 170 to 175 in the BC interior, so Kelowna, Kamloops, Prince George, etc. Look for those prices to go up, perhaps very modestly, perhaps on average another penny, but they'll drop before they go back up, likely by Wednesday or Thursday of next week. For Alberta, a bit of a decrease. They saw prices drop to about $1.40 in Calgary, $1.33, $1.34 in Edmonton. Prices should remain pretty much range bound within that same area. Same for Saskatchewan at $1.52. That would be, of course, Regina and Saskatoon. Winnipeg saw a big increase, but that increase had a lot to do this week with retailers finally charging a retail margin. They were operating on zero, which is impossible to operate on unless you're selling a lot of, as I like to say, beef jerky and coffee and whatever. There isn't enough margin in those to make up losses when you're having to pay 2 and 3 cents a liter for loyalty programs, credit cards, and of course the cost of electricity to turn on your pumps. Ontario saw an increase at the beginning of the week, and that came right back down about 5 cents a liter. We look for an increase of about 2 cents a liter this week on average, more or less by this time next week, as opposed to earlier in the week. We actually might see prices drop 2 cents a liter between now and, of course, Monday. Of course, in Quebec, it follows Ontario because it's the same market, the New York Harbor market, and that price would follow exactly the same, except that it's about 10 cents a liter more because they have more taxes in Quebec. And for the Maritimes, Atlantic Canada, you saw a bit of a decrease, an average of 1.5, 2 cents a liter for both diesel and gasoline. You're likely to see prices move up a little bit next week. But what's really critical here isn't, Teresa, so much the price for gasoline, it's diesel. Because there's been significant demand on diesel, heating oil, and natural gas and propane, it looks like we're going to continue to see pressure on diesel prices that could go up as much as 6 cents a liter right across the country from coast to coast by this time next week. That's because there's a cold snap that seems to be extending the drawdown in inventories and supplies in the United States. And that's going to show up likely by this time next week or on Wednesday when the weekly inventory report comes out from the Department of Energy of the U.S. government. So all in all, for this time of year, we normally don't see prices move up. We sometimes tend to see them fall, but generally speaking, this is a year unlike any other. And I think 2025 is going to turn out to be a lot more expensive than 24 and certainly 23. Energy markets have been behaving in a very different way, driven by money managers who've been investing all their money in AI and technology. Those are interesting areas to put your money in for, obviously, for the future, but you can't get rid of the fundamentals. And I think fundamentals are going to reign extraordinarily important for the economy and for the price of energy. That's why I'm suggesting a few things are coming down the road. On April 1st, I know it sounds like a long way away, but when you think about it, it's only 5, 6, 7 weeks away. We have the increase in carbon taxes, 4 cents a liter across the board from coast to coast. Then on the 15th of April, we're going to see the switch back from winter blends of gasoline, which are cheaper to make and to sell, to more expensive to make summer blends of gasoline. That could mean a 4 or 5 cent increase. I also suspect that the idea that China has plenty of supply and demand is very low is just not to be believed. Countries like China, countries particularly in the Pacific Rim, are going to continue to use a lot more energy, and for that they're going to need a lot more oil, a lot more gas. And of course, with the Trump administration sanctioning Iran, further likely Russia, Venezuela, it's likely we may go back to the scenario I remember working in 2016 to 2020, doing a lot of American media, where you're going to find that will have an upward push on prices, no matter what President Trump suggests he wants to do with energy, as far as energy security is concerned. One thing is very clear, Teresa: the United States cannot proceed with energy, self-sufficiency unless it involves Canada one way or another. I think it's a very strong point for Canada to continue to make. That was expressed by Premier Donald Smith, as I said at the beginning, and it's been very successful up to this point in ensuring that Canada can somehow mitigate some of the sanctions that we might see at the beginning of March, if at all. I'm confident that is a very important point for Canada to play, but let's understand we need to sell more energy to the rest of the world. That means more building of pipelines, and net zero folks can stand aside. That's it, Teresa. Talk to you next week.
Thanks for that, Dan. Again, that was Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. All right, when we come back, we'll be taking a look at the debate over funding the World Health Organization. Donald Trump removed the U.S. from the WHO, claiming the organization failed during the pandemic and is too close to China. But are those claims true? I'll be joined in studio with our news director, David Clement, to discuss those claims and if Canada should follow Donald Trump's lead and pull funding from the organization. That and more right after the break. Donald Trump's executive orders have sent shockwaves through the U.S. and internationally. One of the orders that has stirred up an intense amount of debate is his decision to remove U.S. funding from the World Health Organization.
What is this one? Withdrawing from the World Health Organization, sir?
Ooh, that's a big one. So we paid $500 million to World Health when I was here, and I terminated it. China, with 1.4 billion people, we have 350 to pay. We have, nobody knows what we have because so many people came in illegally, but let's say we have 325. They had 1.4 billion. They were paying 39 million, we were paying 500 million. It seemed a little unfair to me. So that wasn't the reason, but I dropped out. They offered me to come back for 39 million. In theory, it should be less than that, but and when Biden came back, they came back for 500 million. He knew that you could have come back for 39 million. They wanted us back so badly, so we'll see what happens.
Mr. President,
Pretty sad to think of it. China pays 39 million and we pay 500 million. And China's a bigger country.
The executive order justified the move by accusing the organization of mishandling the COVID-19 pandemic, failing on other global health issues, failing to reform, and being too influenced by other countries like China. And with Mr. Trump removing funding, some have called for Canada to do the same. One of those people is our news director, David Clement. David, thanks for taking the time to sit down with me.
Yeah, no problem.
Now, I want to pick your brain on what you make of Trump's claim that the World Health Organization handled the COVID-19 pandemic incorrectly.
They did. From the beginning. So in the very early stages of the pandemic, the World Health Organization tweeted out that there is no evidence of human-to-human transmission of COVID-19. Not only was that wrong, their technical lead for managing the pandemic on that same day was in Geneva giving a presentation saying the exact opposite. That made a lot of people wonder, why was the WHO so wrong on such an important and pivotal moment in the pandemic? How differently would we have reacted without that messaging? Well, according to the Associated Press and other major outlets, it was because the World Health Organization essentially said that they were trying to give China fair coverage and balance, which again made things more uncomfortable. And as the pandemic rolled on, there were increasingly more moments where it was clear that the WHO and its senior officials were essentially bending the knee to China. The most famous one was a Canadian epidemiologist, a senior advisor to the WHO's Director General, asked in an interview about Taiwan, and he couldn't answer the question. He couldn't acknowledge that Taiwan existed. He had hilariously hung up, rejoined the call. She re-asked the question, and he completely ignored her and moved on. And so it became clear not only that the WHO mishandled the pandemic on its initial response, they then flip-flopped on the efficacy of masks, originally telling people not to wear them, then changing their tune, telling everybody to wear them. Think about the politically charged nature of masks during the pandemic in Canada because we followed that flip-flopped guidance. So not only did they get it wrong, they got it wrong because they were kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party.
But if you're going to say that the World Health Organization got it wrong, or Trump is saying that, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States documented the most deaths due to the pandemic. So could it not also be argued that the United States chose to not follow the World Health Organization's recommendations? So technically, they also kind of got it wrong.
They did in some senses, but that would be a difference between domestic policy and international policy. And when you have a global body get it wrong, everybody gets it wrong, right? Every country that followed the WHO's initial mask guidance that you should not wear them as a civilian, only as a healthcare worker, got it wrong, and got it wrong for a long time. And so what happens when you have that consolidation of authority is you maximize the devastation of mistakes. And it's not unique to COVID. The World Health Organization has a terrible track record on other major pandemics and illnesses. The Ebola outbreak in 2014 in West Africa was horrifically managed. Doctors Without Borders very accurately accused the WHO of not only being slow to declare it an emergency, slow to respond in any way. That led to the spread of the virus. That's in 2014. Really no reforms through that outbreak in West Africa, the 2018 to 2020 outbreak again in West Africa, and then the COVID-19 pandemic. And so here we have an organization who's persistently slow. People look up to it as an authority figure, and it fails to meet its goals and obligations, while also being uncomfortably tied to authoritarian regimes who are not our allies.
But to focus on the good things that the World Health Organization has done, you just highlighted a few of the not so good things, but the smallpox vaccine, they created that, and they actually helped save a lot of children's lives. So if we're looking at it from that aspect, would it not have been a bit more of a better idea if Donald Trump decided to agree to, when he pulled out of the World Health Organization funding, they had proposed, well, then pay $39 billion instead. Would it not have been more beneficial if he had taken that option and then also said, I want to sit down with the World Health Organization and we can figure out what works so that there isn't this animosity, but now it's, who do we trust?
Tried and failed.
Okay.
The Trump administration pulled out of the World Health Organization in his first administration. There were no fundamental changes. There were no fundamental changes. There just does not seem to be any appetite to make the structural reform within the organization, like you just suggested. And yes, the WHO has done great things in the past, primarily when it focused on and was effective at dealing with these larger scale issues like smallpox, how it should have been handling Ebola, how it should have been handling the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it just hasn't taken the hint and reformed internally. And there is most definitely a better path forward to deal with global health problems than the WHO.
Now, I want to flip the switch a little bit to Canada. So how much funding is Canada giving to the World Health Organization? And do you think that Canada should pull out?
Yeah, it's just over 200 million.
Okay.
And yes. And for perspective, 200 million is about what the WHO spends a year on travel. In terms of giving you a perspective on maybe how bloated and wasteful the WHO is. And so, yes, I do think that we should pull out. I mean, we had a $62 billion deficit. anything we can do in terms of cost savings is a benefit. I don't think that we completely remove ourselves from global public health initiatives. I actually think that we could be part of almost like a NATO for public health, where we're working with peer countries and allies to tackle some of these big problems that we see arise around the world. That includes information sharing, that includes access to the best medicines, it includes access to the best research. I think that's probably our best path forward in terms of effectively dealing with public health emergencies on a global scale.
But on that topic, if they take more of a NATO approach, what would happen to the third world countries that don't necessarily make the cut?
It's a good point. I think the war in Ukraine has shown that NATO-style alliances are fully capable of assisting and intervening in conflicts that don't involve member states. But in regards to the third world, I would have to also argue that the WHO does not have a good track record in the third world. We go back to 2018 to 2020, the second Ebola outbreak in West Africa. WHO staffers, 21 of them, were found to have committed sexual exploitation, abuse, and 9 instances of rape. So as West Africa is going through a horrific pandemic, you have WHO employees committing some of the worst things they can do to people who are already victims. And so they don't have a particularly good track record of being effective, ethical, and honest in the third world. And I would much rather see a NATO-style public health alliance work with, in a very philanthropic way, work with those countries to actually manage effective public health responses.
Now, we do just have under a minute left, but I'm curious if Canada does pull out of the World Health Organization and this NATO proposal doesn't become a thing, would the shortage of doctors have any sort of implication, and would Canada almost be affected in a negative way from a health standpoint with the lack of doctors that we're experiencing?
I mean, we're balancing a couple different things. I think domestically there are policy changes we have to make in order to increase the amount of family doctors. Where the overlap between doctors and the WHO comes is mostly guidance. And when that guidance is wrong, you have family physicians giving really bad advice to Canadians. And they have maybe the wrong idea that the WHO is right. And so I think that would be a net benefit.
David, thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, stay with us. We'll have more news right after the break. At a press conference in Montreal on Thursday, New Democrat Party leader Jagmeet Singh called for making Canada's economy stronger and more resilient so that workers don't lose their jobs and so our country is not, quote, vulnerable to the whims of Donald Trump.
There are already workers who have lost their jobs because of the threat of Donald Trump's tariffs. ShearTex, a company here in Montreal, has already fired 40% of their workers. South Shore, a company that produces furniture, has fired 115 employees, all because of the threats of Donald Trump. Workers are already feeling the impact. Our first thought is we have to put in place better protections for these workers. These workers should not be left on their own. They should know that there's a government there for them. And as Prime Minister, as a New Democratic leader, the party leader, and my team, we are going to make sure we do everything possible to protect these workers. One of the things we need is a better EI that better protects workers in this time of uncertainty where workers might lose their job. We need to make sure that there's protection in place for them. But beyond that, we also need to have an approach that makes us stronger, makes us more resilient. And so we need to look at a couple of changes, important changes. What we would do is change our procurement rules. We need to make sure that if we're spending public money, any public money, that it goes towards Canadian companies, Canadian contracts that hire Canadian workers, particularly unionized workers who are well paid. We also have a lot of infrastructure projects. In those infrastructure projects, we need to require Canadian content. Thinking about steel and aluminum, we make it in Canada. Let us ensure that when we build, we're using Canadian content. What is also very clear is we are very vulnerable to the whims of Donald Trump. We need to have a more resilient economy, one where we sell to more countries. So we need to have better relations with Europe, with Latin America, and in this particular time with Mexico, where we share some similar challenges. But there are many other trading partners, and we need to diversify. We cannot be so vulnerable to the whims of Donald Trump.
Mr. Singh also called out Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney for wanting to cut jobs amid looming threats of tariffs and a possible recession.
What I find really surprising right now, at a time when we are faced with serious job losses, I've talked about the job losses here in Montreal already, and the tariffs haven't even happened yet. Just the threats have already caused these job losses. At a time when people are worried about job losses, people are losing their jobs, I'm surprised that Mark Carney has also added his voice to cutting jobs. I'm not surprised that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives want to cut jobs. That's what they do. But I am surprised that Mark Carney is also thinking it's a good idea when we're facing a potential recession and we're facing serious job losses, that he wants to add to that by cutting jobs at the federal level. I think that is wrong.
The candidates to replace Prime Minister Justin Trudeau are trying to one-up each other's defense spending plans. Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gold says that they'd have Canada hit NATO's military spending target by 2027, which is 5 years ahead of Trudeau's timeline.
Absolutely. And I think it's an imperative for us. I think we can hit it by 2027. And one of the ways that I'm going to help increase defense spending is by increasing the salaries of our Canadian Armed Forces personnel. Our CAF members are there for us in our time of greatest need. In COVID, in this city, when long-term care facilities were strained and were unable to contain their outbreaks, who went in? Our CAF personnel. When there are natural disasters around this country, who is on the front lines? Our CAF personnel. We do not pay them sufficiently for the incredible service and work that they do, protecting us and being there for us in our time of greatest need. So we can do this, but we have to make that decision, and we have to support our incredible men and women who serve in the military.
And at a news conference in Ottawa, Frank Baylis said he would have Canada hit its NATO spending target by 2030 and stated Canada is underpaying its soldiers.
One of the things we can do quite soon, though, is we are underpaying our soldiers. I don't think so these are certain things that we can do right away to say, look, this is a very good profession. We need you. We want to encourage you. And we could look at how we pay them, how we give them pensions. There's a lot of work just on that level. But that's just one part of a bigger plan.
Defense Minister Bill Blair says U.S. tariffs would reduce Canada's ability to invest in the military and meet NATO's spending target. U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized countries not spending the equivalent of 2% on their GDP on defense. Blair was among Canadian ministers discussing tariffs and Canada's defense spending with U.S. officials in Washington. It's pony up time again for the federal Liberal leadership candidates. A payment of $125,000 is due as part of the required total entrance fee of $350,000. On Thursday, Karina Gold said her campaign is doing everything possible to remain in the race, despite not having the same resources as her main rivals.
So look, the party has put forward an extremely aggressive fundraising deadline. They have tried to make it as hard as possible for only a few candidates to participate in this race. But what I can tell you is my campaign is powered by people. 85% of my donations are $200 or less, and I have received support from thousands of people across this country. We're doing everything to meet those fundraising deadlines, and I have to say that I am buoyed by the incredible support that I am getting from everyday Canadians. My campaign doesn't have the deep pockets of some of the other candidates, but what it does have is people power. And I have to say that we have had great fundraising results, and we're going to keep going. So despite the efforts of the party establishment to keep people out of this race, I'm in it and I'm excited about it.
The party will elect its next leader on March 9th. And Liberal leadership candidate Karina Gold was joined by former MP Adam Vaughan in Toronto on Thursday to address homelessness and to re-announce Mr. Vaughan's housing strategy, which Ms. Gold has adopted as her party platform.
There are 3 pillars to this plan. One is ending homelessness. We talk about the toxic drug supply, we talk about overdoses, we talk about addictions, but if we are truly going to get people off the streets, we need to make sure that they have supportive housing to go to. So this plan would create an accord program with the provinces and territories where the federal government works to house people through an expanded rapid housing initiative, and then has agreements with provinces and territories to provide those wraparound supports to make sure that people can be successful and they can stay off of the streets and lead successful lives. It also means that we want to ensure that we are building more modular housing to rapidly increase the supply that we have available in our country. That is something that is so important. We know that we do not have enough houses in Canada to get people into the houses that they need. And so we need to build more modular homes that are climate resilient, faster and cheaper to build. We also need to accelerate housing production to build faster and smarter in Canada. When it comes to home ownership and market regulation, the housing market today is constrained by outdated models, zoning regulations, and a lack of investment in new housing infrastructure. We will partner with municipalities to streamline zoning and build more homes faster with a new round of housing accelerator funding. And what Adam mentioned and what I'm very committed to is expanding a round of housing accelerator funding. We also need to crack down on predatory speculation. And what Adam mentioned and what I'm very committed to is expanding support for the first-time home buyers program by boosting this initiative to make it up to 50% of an eligible mortgage.
Canada's former Human Rights Chief Commissioner is suing for defamation. Birjo Detani's lawsuit names Conservative Deputy Leader Melissa Lantsman, media personality Ezra Levant, and the Jewish advocacy group Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs.
On August 12, 2024, 4 days after my role was set to begin, I announced my resignation as Chief Commissioner. Shortly after my appointment was announced in June, I became the subject of a vicious smear campaign, painting me as a terrorist supporter and an anti-Semite. These comments led to a third-party investigation. Ultimately, the investigators released a report that found the allegations of anti-Semitism, bias against Jewish people or Israelis, and terrorism support and/or sympathy to be unfounded. That report is publicly available. Despite the report's unequivocal conclusion on these points, the vicious public attacks by a number of groups and individuals persisted in the following days and weeks. That's why I'm here today to announce that I've launched defamation lawsuits against those who spearheaded a targeted attack against me this past summer. Conservative Member of Parliament Melissa Lantsman, right-wing media personality Ezra Levant, and the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, CJA.
Detani's lawyer says there has not yet been an official response from the defendants. Canada's labour market blew past expectations last month, adding 76,000 jobs. Economists have been calling for about 25,000 new jobs, and Statistics Canada says the unemployment rate now sits at 6.6%, ticking down 0.1 percentage points from December. The growth comes as the possibility of steep tariffs from the United States continues to loom over Canada. If the tariff threat is realized, TD predicts the Canadian economy will enter a recession around mid-year and see unemployment reach 7%. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on social media. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the Newsforum YouTube channel. Good night, Canada.